100 citizens, innocents, being held by armed terrorists in a theater. And we've seen this before, and it doesn't necessarily play out neatly.
Yeah, Juan, that Moscow theater scenario, 133 hostages ultimately lost their lives back in 2002 when that happened. I'm also recalling back in 1989 that Air France flight that was hijacked from Algeria landed in Marseille. In that instance, French commandos storming the plane, killing the hostage takers, able to rescue those passengers there. In a situation like this, though, the question becomes, will they try and negotiate at all with the people who have these hostages? Or will they go the Air France route and storm that enclave and try to get the folks out of there?
All good questions, Vlad, but way too early to tell. I think they and we will have to know more about the situation. But I think in any hostage situation, all options are on the table, and certainly hostage professionals will have in their playbook a willingness to talk to the hostage takers, if in fact they're willing to talk. And I think that will be a part of any effort if in fact this begins to unfold like a classic hostage situation. The French commandos, as we've seen in the past, are incredibly good, very professional. They've trained over the years and have had to deal, as we saw in the Charlie Hebdo situation, with very real-world situations. And so, God willing, things turn out well. But the French are good at this, and they'll have all options on the table.
And we've seen with previous situations like this, previous terrorist attacks, many times the group behind it, and even groups not behind it, claim responsibility on social media. Is it unusual that at this point we still haven't seen anybody say that they are behind these coordinated attacks?
It's not unusual in that the attacks are still unfolding. And so if, in fact, this is an organic set of attacks, individuals who were self-motivated decided to attack in a very vicious and organized way are doing this, the terrorist groups from the outside or associates are probably trying to figure out what's happening themselves. If this has been triggered by or trained from or directed by a terrorist group like ISIS or an al-Qaeda affiliate, then they're likely waiting for this to unfold fully before they take advantage of the propaganda value. But it's hard to tell. The different media campaigns have altered over time. ISIS has been much more aggressive in terms of claiming responsibility for attacks, and they tend to do it fairly early on. Although with situations like this, it may be that everybody, including terrorist organizations, are dealing with the fog of war.
Juan, before we let you go, I know you got to get in front of a camera. I just have a quick question for you. As we watch the scene unfolding in Paris right now, clearly it's only 5:20 p.m. here in New York City, in other cities across America, and other Western capitals in Europe. What are the leaders, if anything, of these countries and cities doing in anticipation of something that could be coming if we're seeing something like this in Paris?
Vlad, again, another great question. I think what counterterrorism and security officials and leaders have to do at a time like this is assume the worst. Obviously react to what's happening, and so leaders are going to be offering as much help as possible to the French. That's information, that's any tactical help that can be offered. That will happen right away, and it's happening. In addition, they are probably thinking about their own vulnerabilities and worried about two things. One, if this is a coordinated and organized set of attacks, can something happen in a place like London? Is something going to be triggered in a place like Brussels? Even in the United States, is something potentially going to happen at rush hour, which is something security officials might worry about here on the East Coast or West Coast. The second thing they worry about is inspiration of attacks. Even if something hasn't been directed or isn't fully organized or articulated as a set of attacks, will individuals who are like-minded, motivated, radicalized, suddenly motivated to go out onto the streets and attack either as they've contemplated or in a random way? And so I think you're going to see beefed up security in a lot of different places, not just in France.
Juan Zarate, thank you very much, Juan, for joining us. We appreciate your analysis.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. He's also joining us to talk about this. Colonel Shaffer, thanks for joining us tonight on a horrific night for French citizens. As we understand now, at least 100 hostages that have been taken and up to 26 people, maybe more, killed in multiple incidents across the French capital. What are you making of all this as of right now?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm sorry to be under such tragic circumstance, but yeah, I think we're looking at a very well-planned, extraordinarily well-executed attack, which does echo the Charlie Hebdo attack earlier this year. And the reason I'm saying that is clearly, terrorist organizations tend to learn both from successes and failures. And it's very clear that whoever planned the Charlie Hebdo attack learned a lot. And that to me kind of tells me, that there may well be ISIS or Al-Qaeda or a combination of both, which is obviously who was behind the Charlie Hebdo attack. More importantly, for what in your last interview was talking about the fact that the reason that no one's claimed responsibility, things may not be done yet. This may be the beginning of a series of attacks, and it could well even go beyond France. We just don't know at this point. But the thing is, right now, to obviously cauterize the wounds, try to figure out what's happened immediately. And I know I've been talking to folks right here, in our intelligence community in the Pentagon. Everybody right now is trying to figure out if there's any potential linkage to here. And obviously, not to put too fine a point on it, we have recognized that ISIS is becoming far more expeditionary, and we'd like to see it. And I think this is where we have to pay close notice, pay very close attention to how this was done, who was behind it, and what the potential is for something like that happening here.
And it is still so early in the situation developing, but you could notice the timing. Today we did learn that Jihadi John, as he goes by, may have been killed, likely was killed in this drone strike. These events, these attacks seem to be so coordinated, it doesn't seem like something that could be put together within hours. But do you think that could be any link to Jihadi John?
Well, this could have been the assassination of Jihadi John may well have been the trigger for this. But with that said, there's no way they could have just decided this morning we're going to seek revenge. There's three reasons why. First off, these locations had to have been scouted, essentially what we call casing, by the folks who are attacking them. Secondly, it sounds like there's been use of suicide bombers, which to me then means you had to put together an improvised explosive device, which takes time to put those things together properly, to make sure that you can hide them under clothes. Again, you can't just decide on the spur of the moment, one day you're going to do it. And third, and more importantly, you're talking about three separate locations. And basically we're talking about a soccer game, a bar of some sort, and a concert hall where you don't have hostages. Again, to know those locations would have those people at this time of day had to be something where they had to have good intelligence. So in essence, we don't know. We don't know if the Johnny assassination had something to do with it was a trigger, or by some chance of fate, these attacks were planned for this day anyway. I think we will learn more over the next couple of days. But with that said, it's very clear, and I actually said this on CBSN yesterday, that we were going to see the Pentagon step up and do a lot more aggressive actions against ISIS, and obviously one of those was to take out Jihadi John. We had the victory with the Kurds over one of the locations they took back from ISIS. So this, we are seeing our own stepping up of attacks because we have been worried about this very sort of thing expanding out, that ISIS becoming more expeditionary. Again, we don't know ISIS yet, but my bet is that ISIS was somehow involved in this.
Colonel Shaffer, you point out that whoever may have perpetrated these crimes watch very closely what happened in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo attacks and perhaps learn something about how French security officials and forces respond in a situation like that. On the flip side of that, what do you think that French officials, I guess the question is going to be, in a society that we live in the West, in an open society, a free society, are we always going to be on the defensive in situations like this because we cannot predict when and where they will attack? They haven't attacked hard targets like an embassy, like presidential or a legislative building. They're attacking bars and restaurants, and although there's certainly some planning that goes into something like that, I can tell you the street where this attack happened in Tête Arrondissement is just like any other street in Paris. There's nothing special about it.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, living in a free and open society, you always have that risk. With that said, I think we have to be a lot more diligent in our own activities to recognize when something like this is happening. And let me be clear on this. As much as something like this is tragic, the terrorists generally do have a pattern. We recognized this back in the 80s, where terror groups were then engaged in going after U.S. facilities, U.S. members, and often basically kidnapping folks. So what we recognized then, and I think we stepped away from it, is actually looking for pattern of attack analysis, pattern of activity. All terror groups have to case. All terror groups have to seek and obtain weapons. There's certain commonalities, and these things are more or less observable depending on how well you have basically focused your intelligence collection. And that's why it's so important for us to stay ahead of them. So, yeah, in a free society, it is imperative that we have strong intelligence, strong individuals who understand the patterns to look for, and people who are willing to set aside any quote-unquote political correct issues regarding populations. I'm not saying we should profile. I'm saying we should look at the target groups which are most likely to go about doing something like this. And I think this is where you have to be a lot more diligent in accepting the fact that, we have now a refugee population, a certain percentage of which we know that ISIS is using to place their operatives. And this is now, this is 2 times now the Parisians and the French have been attacked by terrorist organizations. I know we don't know for sure, but no organized crime organization would go about doing what they've just done in Paris because there's nothing in it for them. This is clearly meant to terrorize. This is clearly meant to send a message. The question now becomes, who is sending that message, and how do we then prepare to try to detect this sort of thing ahead of time or prevent it from happening at all?
Colonel, you had mentioned in our previous discussion something about a suicide bombing. Would that be
Right.
in the stadium? Because we had just heard explosion. Can you give any more information about that?
One of my sources was telling me that one of the actual bar was apparently, according to my source, a suicide bombing. That's why they're having a hard time figuring out exactly how many people were dead. So I think this is one of my sources I was talking to a few minutes ago. It's maybe new, but according to my guy, they apparently were at least one suicide bombing in a bar where the individual apparently blew himself up. So that my information is that there may well have been suicide bombers involved, which again, to me, is a terrorist tactic.
And Colonel, we understand now, as we've been telling our viewers, that there may be at least 100 hostages being held in a theater there in Paris. And the question, and we were asking Juan Zarate about this too, in his capacity as an analyst, to analyze some of the capabilities of not only the French security forces, but in these types of situations, what's the best possible course of action? And given your military experience, given your experience with the intelligence gathering side of things, in a situation like this, does it make sense to try and negotiate with these guys? I mean, generally speaking, guys that are willing to blow themselves up, I don't know if they want to negotiate for anything other than their martyrdom, or do you say, you know what, we're going to have to storm this this theater and try to take these guys out?
Well, we can look at the Russian model. Russia has been battling Chechen rebels for a while, and a lot of the time the Russians were forced to actually take extraordinary means to go in and take these folks out because their belief was, the preposition was, these guys, even though they're holding hostages, have nothing to gain. There's nothing to gain for them. There's nothing left for them. They're kind of what we call dead enders. So, yeah, I think the security forces that we're talking about here are going to have to make some very hard choices very rapidly, because this may well be something where the suicide bombers, basically terrorists, see this as a suicide mission, and those people who are in there are only being held long enough for them to basically assemble some sort of a spokesman to make a few comments about why they're doing it and then go about killing everybody. So this is something where the GSG, they're going to have to get in close. They're going to have to get some microphones in there. There's ways of actually doing some very surreptitious collection, even close in like that, to figure out what's being said internally. And then they've got to take that tactical intelligence and make some very hard decisions. I would not want to be them this evening.
And at this point, it does seem like we have numerous attacks, and it's all different types. So you mentioned a suicide bombing. There's explosions. We heard there's shootings, hostages. Does it seem? This doesn't seem like it was in any way lone wolves. This seems coordinated. Is that what you would infer?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, we're talking about multiple locations executed within, I would probably, I don't know the timeline yet. I haven't seen anything that specifically talks about the timeline, but it was actually executed within a certain timeline. By the way, the stadium that was attacked was actually, the president of France was actually there apparently and had to be evacuated. So that's another symbolic target. So when you combine the timing, the scope, and then, again, the symbology, I mean, the fact that you had, something going on close to the French president tells me that this was clearly meant to send a message, the message that has yet to be defined. But, yes, I would, and again, my money, if I had to bet a month's salary right now, I would bet that we're going to find that this was something to do with ISIS, and I would speculate, in addition, that you're going to find that these things were smuggled in from Syria in some form. Some of the weapons probably came up through Europe because once you get into the European Union, it's pretty easy to move through international borders. The big thing is getting to Turkey. Once you're in Turkey, getting across into Athens or Greece and then moving through the rest of the EU is fairly simple. So I think that we're going to find that some of these things were actually, it was well planned, planned in advance. Again, I don't know if the Jihad John thing was relevant or not. But this was clearly meant. This has been in the planning for months.
And to that point, Colonel Schaefer, we know now that the President of the United States has been briefed on the situation in France. We saw a tweet earlier from British Prime Minister David Cameron about this situation as well. What are, we're just about coming up to rush hour here on the East Coast of the United States. I'm just curious, what do you think the leaders in these countries, in the UK, in the United States, in Germany, in Belgium, what are they doing as they see what is unfolding in France right now? There's got to be some kind of intelligence sharing.
Well, first off, they're going to go back and look at the chatter. One of the things we recognized right before the downing of the Russian aircraft in the Sinai, well, there was some chatter, and that chatter was paid attention by the British, but not everybody knew it was coming. So the first thing is to look at the patterns of chatter. Does that pattern meet what we just saw in Paris? Is there something there? And then you send that information out. You share it. Five Eyes, have this information. Basically, the British and all of us share this information rapidly, and then you look for patterns of similar consequence in locations either here, Canada, basically the Commonwealth nations and our allies. If we don't see anything there, then we don't ratchet up the security too much. But obviously the first thing the Pentagon does, and the intelligence community, is they issue valid warnings to law enforcement. And then obviously law enforcement then has to try to assess the local situation as best they can based on the new intelligence. So that's what's going on as we speak right now. That's all like right now in real time. What you may see is a heightened profile by the end of this evening, depending on what the assessment is of the intelligence community and the law enforcement analysts. And what we're going to see here, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're going to see that if there's any local threats within the United States that we have to pay attention to, that's the first thing the President's going to ask the Pentagon and the intelligence community to figure out is what do we have to do to protect Americans or our interests, and that's going to be our first focus. But with that said, this is clearly an international issue. Clearly, ISIS, I do believe this is ISIS. I do believe they're becoming expeditionary. And with that said, then, we have to all take seriously what we can do to counter this threat. These people are serious. They are out for blood. They are out to kill innocents. And we got to nip this in the bud over there before it becomes here.
So to that end, Colonel Schaefer, it's interesting that you feel that this is, in your analysis, that this has been committed by ISIS, although there have been no claims of responsibility as of yet.
Right.
And so to what ends? Attacking soft targets like this, okay, that certainly sets a population that makes people worry, that makes people afraid. On the other hand, it can have a repercussion on them, which is the security forces in France become much more stringent with how they deal with people who they might feel have suspected ties to terrorism. And how does it further their goals? I mean, they're not capturing territory here. You say that we should go after them in Syria and Iraq, which is apparently what we are doing right now.
Right. Well, we are, I think, picking up the pace right now in doing that. But, yes, I think that's the issue. Why would they be doing it? Well, there's two reasons. First, there is a restive Muslim population in France. This has been an issue for a while. I think that there are issues regarding the fact that some cities have become essentially completely dominated and under control of Sharia law. So this is something the French have to figure out for themselves. Do we wish to have a society which is becoming essentially a co-holder of territory that's co-equal to their constitution? That's what's going on. And I think that's what ISIS, whoever this is, I'm speculating, obviously my speculation, not yours, that ISIS is behind this because I think they're attempting to push the population itself to become more violent. And again, this is what we're talking about here, extremism. Extremism is something that happens by those groups who believe that they can use basically violence as part of their political will to insinuate themselves and their values on others. And ISIS has not found anybody to push back on them yet. Again, the Charlie Hebdo attack was successful. I know the French went about trying to secure and stop it again, but here we are.